Amen. Y'all can be seated this morning. We're in a new series called Living Faith. And it's so important that we understand faith. We often use that word in Christianese in a lot of ways, faith this, faith that, gotta have faith. Even the world has, used the word in ways, gotta have faith, faith, faith. Maybe you don't remember that was my day, but it's crazy how often the word faith is used on a regular basis at church, and then I hear how they use it, and I wonder, do they really understand faith? Do they really understand faith? And how important that is, because we can look in Hebrews chapter 6, or chapter 11, verse 6, we read this, "And without faith, it is impossible to please God." I want you to catch that again, because you're going to see how important faith is to us. Without faith, it is what? Impossible to please God. Here's the thing. The world tells us that if you do a lot of good things, if you're a good person, you can please God. Religion will even tell you, that if you live, and maybe in Christianity especially, if you live by the Bible, you can please God. And there's kind of often preached that if you do what God tells you to do in obedience, you will please God. But can I tell you something? The Bible actually declares you can live righteously, and God looks at our righteous acts and sees them as filthy rags. Why? If you don't do it by faith. That's how important faith is. Faith is the essence of our faith, right? Faith is the essence of our faith, the very idea of salvation, the very idea that we've been called unto faith. And we know all these definitions. Before in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, we read, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see." In our one-on-one discipleship, you know that one of our definitions of faith is choosing to live as though the Bible were true, regardless of circumstances, emotions, and what culture says. There are a million definitions of faith. I can remember in seminary, we talked about faith a lot. And I thought I understood faith until I had to have faith in something bigger than me. And then I realized that I might theologically say yes to faith, but I didn't completely understand what faith means. And I should, because once again, without faith, it is impossible to please God. So today, as we enter into this series talking about living faith and the way we live out our faith, the first thing I thought we should do is say, do we really understand the necessary ingredients of faith? Now, how many of you like to cook? Yeah, and it's important when you cook to have the right ingredients. How many of you have cooked a cake in the last year? All right, where was mine? I'm just asking. Come on. Pastor needs his cake. You think about the 4 ingredients that are necessary for a cake. Eggs, right? Flour, or if you're gluten-free, whatever you use, I don't understand it, right? It doesn't taste like flour. You got to have some sort of liquid, be it, milk, or what they call milk when they take it out of, these nuts now. I'm like, that's not milk. It's just white-colored something or other. But, water, some kind of liquid, and then the last is a leavening agent. You need something that takes the cake from this to this, right? Now, everything else, if you have those, you can call it a cake. Now, you might like the other ingredients and different ways to have your cake. There's wedding cake, there's birthday cake. People like different kinds of cake, like yellow cake and chocolate cake. And then, I don't know, there might be one person in here who likes fruit cake, and I don't know why. It's disgusting. But you have to have those 4 ingredients. And so as we talk about faith in the next few weeks, what we need to understand is there are 4 real ingredients to faith. The foundational faith, to really understand how do we use this word, what does it mean? It's necessary to understand these 4 absolute ingredients. Now, where we're going to see that is, we're going to go to Luke chapter 7. And we're going to read Luke 7, 2 through 10. and then we're going to talk about it. So we read this. There's a centurion, okay? The centurion would have been a Roman soldier, right? He's over at least 100 other soldiers. He's in charge, okay? And it says there's a centurion servant, so he has a servant, whom his master valued highly. Now that sounds weird because if you look at it, you could go, oh, that servant was worth more than some of the other servants. But that's not really what that word means. It's precious. Like he cared about this servant. And the servant was sick and about to die. So the centurion heard of Jesus and sent some of the elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they had come to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. Next slide. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. Did you hear what Jesus proclaimed? From a guy who wasn't even a Jew. He wasn't even just a Gentile come to live with them. He was in some ways part of the oppressive nation that were over them. And yet he sees what the centurion says and how he acts, and he tells all those around, he says, this is faith. So if Jesus declares this as faith, let's look at the kind of faith, the ingredients of this faith that we should also be able to live out. And the first one is this. And this is something we don't really attach often to faith, but it's this, it's humility. Humility is huge and necessary for faith. You saw that the centurion said, at first you read that like the centurion sends out these elders to go to Jesus. Now maybe if you didn't read the rest of it, you would have gone, well, is he saying he's too good for Jesus? Like he's telling these elders who need him because he's over everything, he's going to send them out because he doesn't have time for Jesus. You know, he's just sending them out because he's over everything. He doesn't have to. No, we read as it goes on, he not only sends the elders, but then he sends another group and tells them, hey, don't even come to my house. Now you got to understand, Jesus as a Jew, wasn't even supposed to go into a Gentile's house. So in some ways, he's trying to save Jesus from having to do something he shouldn't do. And he says, because I'm not coming to you, not because I believe I'm in authority over you. I'm coming to you because I'm not worthy. I'm coming to you in a spirit of humility, in that if I come in person, I have no place. I'm coming humbly. Real faith, all faith, starts in humility. You know, it's weird sometimes when I talk to people about faith and they tell me, I believe God can do it. Then they make bargains with God, right? They go, hey, God, tell you what. Have you ever prayed this? Have you ever had a bargain with God where you're like, God, I'll give you X if you give me Y. God, I'll start coming to both services on Sunday if my football team would win a game, right? I mean, but really and seriously, we've probably had those conversations with God where we're like, God, I need you to do this, so if you do this, then I'll do this. Can I tell you something? There's no humility in that. You know why? Because you're saying you've got something God needs or wants. You know what? True humility and true understanding is this centurion. I'm not worthy. In fact, if you've come to him in salvation faith, right? If you come to him, remember what Ephesians 2:8 and 9 says? For by grace you've been saved through what? faith, not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works. So what? You can't claim you had anything to do with it. You can't say, God, I gave you something in order to receive salvation faith. I lived a good life. I did all the rules. I dedicated this and that, and now you're saving me. No, the Bible says the underlying first step of faith, as even someone who comes to God, is to say, God, you give me grace, I give you nothing other than myself. Now, here's the thing is, once you receive salvation, we call him Lord, guess what? You don't have anything else to give because you've already given it all. If you haven't, if you've held yourself back, you've missed what it means to be a follower of Christ. A follower of Christ says, I've laid myself on the altar, everything I have is yours. So what do I have to bargain with? It'd be like saying, hey, you know what? I said, I'll give you my car for $10,000, and you go, okay, and you go, and then a couple days later you go back and you go, I give you my car again for another $10,000. No, they already got everything. They don't need that. In the same way, when we try to bargain with God, we claim that we have something that we don't have. So when we come in faith, God's not asking for us to bargain with him. We have nothing to bargain with. God says we come with the idea in faith is, I'm humbling myself because I'm not worried. I'm humbling myself. And you're going to see this in the other three ingredients. Faith is the underlying ingredient of all of it. It says, I trust you regardless. I trust you regardless. I like singing Gratitude. It's one of my favorite songs. And one of the things it says is, so I throw up my hands and praise you again and again, because all that I have is what? A hallelujah. And I know it's not much, but I've nothing else fit for a king except a heart singing hallelujah. What's it saying? There's nothing I have that's worthy of you. That's what the centurion understood. The centurion understood as he sent the elders. Here's what's really funny. Do you hear what the elders said? They even missed it. The Jewish elders are like, he deserves this. I'm sure the centurion had no idea that they would be coming trying to convince him by saying, oh, he's done all these good things. Because the centurion says, I know that doesn't matter. I know that doesn't matter. I think sometimes we begin our faith journey with trying to convince God that we have something for him that would be worthy of him, instead of just coming as a servant, as a child, and saying, God, I'm not worthy, but you know what? Your character says we don't have to do something to earn grace. You didn't do anything to earn salvation. So when we talk about faith, it is undergirded with humility. The second ingredient is this. It's trusting in God's power. It's trusting in God's power. When we read about the centurion, he says when he heard about Jesus, he said, hey, I need to get that guy to come heal my servant. He immediately believed that Jesus had the power to heal his servant. I think sometimes we think that we understand when you look at the word that's often in Greek, that is faith. It's also often described as, in a verb tense, it's believe. And the problem is as English people, we use the word believe different than how the Bible uses this word. We talk about John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever, what? Believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. That's the same word pistis that has to do with when we use faith as a noun. It's the same idea. It's trusting. And here we have to trust that God has the power. I heard a story once that it was a little girl and her dad, and it was her birthday. And her dad said, hey, there's a circus in town. Let's go to the circus. I'll buy tickets. When we get there, I'll give you $30 and you can spend it for whatever you want. You can buy food, you could buy little toys that they sell at the circus, the ones that break in like 5 seconds. You remember those. The one that I remember, I got one that had sparks that like you went, woo, and it had all the sparks. Yeah, that lasted all of about, 1 hour. You can spin it on whatever you want. And so they went to the circus, and they went to the big tent. They saw the lions and all the cool things there. And then this was obviously before everything became, political, because they actually had the bearded lady, and I'm not going to make the comment that I'm thinking about. But they had the bearded lady, saw that. They saw like the wolf man, and they saw the tallest man. And then they got into this one, and it was the world's strongest man. And the little girl couldn't see because there was only standing room, so she got on the shoulders. And the world's strongest man took a phone book and went, and the little girl whispered it in her ear of her dad. She said, I believe you could do that. I believe you're stronger than him. And then the guy gets, this thing in his mouth, and there's a truck, and he's pulling this truck, and she whispers to her dad, said, Daddy, I believe you could do that. You're stronger than him. And then he has this big barbell with supposedly lots of weight, and he pulls it up and puts it over his head, and she whispers, Dad, I believe you could do that. You're stronger than him. And when the show was over, they went outside, and as they went, there were all the games. You know, the ones that they take advantage of you because you can't win? But there was the one at the bell game where you use a sledgehammer and then, it goes up, and if you hit the bell, you win. And she saw this huge stuffed bear, and she had $5 left. She looks at her $5 and said, one try for $5. And she looks at her dad and she says, Dad, I want you to win me that bear. And he says, do you believe I can do it? And she says, yes. So they get in line, her last $5, and she hands it, and there's a couple other people before, and the first guy was about the same size as her dad, and he tries and gets it maybe halfway, and the next one tries and gets it maybe halfway, and she pulls her dad down, and she says, Dad, I believe you can convince the world's strongest man to come play for me. I tell you that story because sometimes we say, God, I believe you have all the power. And then as soon as it gets hard, we're like, maybe not. Right? When it costs us something, when we're having to give our life. I can remember personally when, the idea of coming out here and starting a church, the moment God called, that sounded great. The moment we got here and there were no homes, it wasn't as big, it wasn't like, woo! You see, throughout Scripture, I've been reading in Exodus and walking through that for my daily time. And you watch, and God takes the people out of Egypt through 10 huge, plagues. And they even get to get all of these great things from the Egyptians. They give stuff away. It says, they basically robbed them or was able to take the spoils of all the Egyptians. And they get out there, and like 3 days later, they're hungry, and they're like, where's God? Where's God? That's us, folks. We can proclaim, I trust that God has the power. I trust that God has the power. And in the moment it gets hard or something comes up or there's an obstacle, do I really? Do I trust that God has the power? If I ask the question right now, 99% of you would raise your hand because you'd be expected to. But let me ask you a question. When the time comes, do you really believe that God has the power? See, the first ingredient is humility, that I can't do it. The second ingredient is I trust that God has the power. And then the third ingredient is that God has the authority. That he's not just strong enough, but he doesn't have to get permission for anything. He doesn't have to ask you. We read in Luke 7:7-8, we read this. That is why I did not consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes. I tell that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. He says, I recognize God, or Jesus, I recognize you have the authority. Back then, in order to heal, if you ever read how healings happened, they either had to put their hands on them, they had to do, different things, they had to get in the water. There were certain things that had to be done. But here, the centurion has gone beyond anyone else and throughout any of the scriptures so far. He says, you know what, Jesus? I know I've heard stories, I know you don't even have to show up to my house. You say the word. You have authority. You can say immediately, be healed, and that servant would be healed. In Matthew chapter 28:18, we read this. Then Jesus came to them, this is at the end of Matthew when he sends them out, and he said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to who? It says me. That the Father gave to the Son all authority. Look, folks, our God has all the authority. He doesn't look for permission. He's not like, well, you know what? The physical laws of this world says this can't happen. Shucks. No, he has all authority. He doesn't have to get permission. You know who does? Our enemy. You know who even recognizes God's authority? Remember when Jesus would encounter demons? You know what they did? They recognized Jesus' authority. You know the sad part for us where we least recognize God's authority? In our lives. When God calls us to something and we're like, nah, I'm not sure. You want to know what faith is? Faith is to say, God just doesn't have authority over the physical things of this world. God, I trust that God has authority over me. God has authority over me. So we have humility. We have trust in God's power. We have trust in God's authority. But this last one is the one that we struggle with the most. Because we've all been there where we would say, yes, I know that God has all the power. Yes, I know that God has all the authority. But God, when I needed you most, when I asked you to heal my wife, when I asked you to take away the pain of my back, when I needed more money for something and I asked you for it, when I needed help out of trouble, when my job began to slip and I lost it and I needed another job, God, where were you? If you truly had all the power, if you truly had all the authority, why am I struggling, or did I struggle? You know, I hear from people all the time that said, you know, they'll tell me, I lost my faith. I lost my faith. And when I said, how did you lose your faith? And it came down to, because their faith, they believed that God could, and when God didn't do it, they said, well, then it must not be true. Here's the key, the fourth ingredient. God, you have to trust that God is sovereign. What does that mean? Well, sovereignty, king, right? You got a king, and when a sovereign is over a nation, what? He can do whatever he wants. Now you go, well, you know, we'd make an accusation. Well, then, so is God just up there going, well, I think I like you, so you get what you want, and you don't. And he's just out there picking, you know, well, you know, your friend gets healed, but not you. Your buddy gets the good job, but not you. You know, and we think, is that what it means? No, absolutely not. Because when we trust that God is sovereign, we also trust in his character. Romans chapter 8, verses 28 through 29, we read this. And we know, Paul, remember, this is Paul talking, right? And he's speaking, and if we know Paul and you read all his letters, guess what you recognize about Paul? That dude was beaten. That dude was shipwrecked. He was bitten by a poisonous snake. He was beaten many times, inches of his life. He'd been jailed. He spent much of his last few years just in jail, like not being able to go places where he wanted to. He had a thorn in the flesh. Some of us, you know, might say that was a physical thing. Some say it was an emotional thing. Some say it was a mental thing. But whatever it is, Paul was not happy about it. And yet, Paul would say, what happened? I know God could take care of it. I know he had the power to take it away. I know that he's the authority. He could immediately say, be gone. He said, but you know what God told me instead? My grace is sufficient for you. Why? He says, because we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. And we're like, exactly. Why wouldn't he heal me when I wanted healing? He says, for God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his son, so that his son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. You know why sometimes God allows those things to continue? God allows those things to happen. It's not because he's not powerful enough, and it's not because he doesn't have the authority to do it. You know what it is? Because that is his definition of good. Because God says, I want you to look like Jesus. And if I give you everything you want, when you want, how you want, you know what's going to happen? You are not going to look like Jesus. I've seen those folks. They're on, the TV all the time. They have their own shows. You look at them and you go, those people are crazy. God says, hey, I have good for you. But it's my definition of good, and it's better than your definition. You're like, oh, no, I don't think so. I'd rather have this house or this car or this retirement fund that I never have to worry about. I'd rather be well. I'd rather wake up like I'm 18 instead of 50. All these things are like, but God, I'd rather. And God goes, I know you think you would, but this is what's really good. And God's sovereign. He has more for us. And when I say that, people want to go, well, I see this guy on television, and he says that if I have faith, I can get all those things you just talked about. Can I tell you something? And then they say, oh, by the way, and if you didn't get healed, you know what? You just didn't have enough faith. You know what that is? That's a lack of humility. Because at the same time, it's saying that somehow you have something, your power to believe is what moves God's heart. You have nothing. It's all by his grace that those things get done. The idea that, I believe enough and I can get what I want, and if I don't, it's because you just didn't believe enough. Folks, that's a lie. You know why they have money? Because they've tricked people into believing that that's true. If that's true, how come Paul wasn't the richest man in the world at his time? If that's true, why did Paul ever have to go to prison? You talk about somebody who was faithful. Yeah, does God have, can we ask God for things and God gives us things? Does God still heal? He certainly does. Ask my wife and her brain tumor. She went back to the doctor. She has to go once a year this last week, and they check on the margins to see if the tumors come back, and it hasn't. My wife's been healed. Does he still take care of it? Does he still give his children good things even in this world? Of course he does. We see it. I've experienced it. I mean, to be honest with you, the very fact that I have a home here says that God gives us good things. But you know what? I look back, and I had a lot of prayers coming out here that I so desperately, I was going to start my own company. And I came, for those who don't know, I wasn't the original senior pastor. I was coming out to help my friend Ray start the church. And my plan was to have my own business. And I was going to, I'd already started the same business back in Texas at a company. So I was going to do it for myself. And I was going to be able to give all this money. And I was going to support the church and all that. And you know what God said? Not going to work that way. What I found out is I was trying to trust me. I wanted God to bless me so I could trust me so I didn't have to trust him. And this morning, I look, and as I was even praying about it this morning, I was like, God, thank you for not giving me what I wanted. Man, I could say that over and over and over because I want a lot of stuff. I want an easy life. I mean, it would be nice to have an easy life, but you know what I realize is when it's easy, I grow away from him, not closer to. I look less like Jesus than I do when I have to wait on him and wrestle with him because he knows better than me. So yeah, humility is the undergirding of all of this because it's the trust that he's the only one. It's the trust in it that he is all powerful. It's the trust that he has all authority, and it's the trust that he knows better than us. And he is a good God. And he is a God of grace and mercy. And he is a God who wants to give to his children. But his biggest thing is he wants his children to look like his son, Jesus. And we can trust that he will do that. This morning, as we move on in the series talking about living faith and the different types of faith that we live in, I want us to understand these are necessary ingredients. That if you struggle with these, this is the place to say, God, maybe I haven't truly been pleasing you because my faith has been lacking. I've been making bargains. I've been expecting, and when I'm disappointed, I get mad and angry. I haven't even recognized you. I recognize you as the authority over the physical world, but I haven't recognized your authority in my life. I certainly maybe haven't understood that you're sovereign and that your character is unimpeachable because you are always faithful to what you say you will do. Father, I pray today that the people here this morning, the church as a whole, will recognize these important ingredients to faith. That God, I look and read this story and I see where the centurion who's used to giving orders recognized that he wasn't the order giver and he asked. And there was no declaration that that Jesus had to do anything. He recognized that Jesus would do as he willed. And yet, because of his faith, his servant was healed. Lord, you do desire to do good things in our lives. God, there is more for each of us here. But I pray we'll undergird everything we ask for and everything we do with these principles, these ingredients, that God, we will have the faith that pleases you. Because that's the ultimate as your sons and daughters. That's the ultimate as a Christ follower, is to please you. Not just to live rightly under the rules, but to trust you as our Father in all these ways. Help us trust you. And we ask this in Jesus Christ's name.